I remember I was involved in a shooting at one point. One of my friends, their friend wanted to get shot, so we took him outside and, we shot him in the arm one night. And it's like we were really just doing anything and everything that was harmful to ourselves. Like most people, childhood is kind of up and down with parents and marriage and divorce and moving around. So by the time I was 10, lived in Kansas, Texas, and Germany due to military moving. Ended up in Salina. That's with my mom having 2 ex-husbands and going through all of that. I just remember a few times my aunt and my mom tried taking me and my sisters to church and everything, but it was never a consistent thing. It never stuck. And I just remember at 12, I was just like, there's really no point to any of this. And it was probably 12 or 13 that I became an atheist. When I was in middle school, that's the first time I experimented and I smoked weed. 16, I started drinking. Right after high school, I ended up getting a job. I started working at this factory, and one of my closest friends when I worked there, he was in prison for 4 years for attempted murder, and I started hanging out with him and all of his friends. And with him, I started drinking more, and basically from 2005 to 2011, it was just nonstop parties. Basically, when I wasn't working, I was drinking, or I was trying to get high, or I was just doing something. The only time I would really be around people is if I could find some way that they could entertain me. I didn't care if it was, immoral, like if it was sexually immoral, if it was violence, if it was just to make me laugh, or if I could get them angry. Only kept them around when I wanted to be entertained. At the beginning of 2011, I had a friend who was like, hey, do you want to come live with me in North Carolina? At the time, I was like, yeah, I have nothing else going on here. So I quit my job and I moved to North Carolina, but I didn't want to really work anymore. So I searched for jobs, but I wasn't searching hard. I was still just wanting to drink with the new people that I was meeting there. Because of that, me and my buddy, we ended up losing the place that we were living at. So I ended up homeless, and I was like, well, if I'm gonna be homeless, I'm gonna move back to Kansas, where I know people will feed me. I was probably couch surfing or staying at my sister's place for 4 or 5 months before I finally got a job. And then when I got a job, I actually ended up getting 2 at the same time. One in a warehouse and one in a bar. And as someone who had a drinking problem, getting a job at a bar wasn't the best idea, especially when they let you run a tab and they would just take it out of your paycheck. I just remember one of my paychecks being negative $100-something after discounts and tabs. I had no intention of stopping. At the end of 2013, Sierra, my little sister, her grandpa had died, and she got really upset about that. And her being really sad, it kind of put me in a funk. I was drinking pretty heavily, and I got suicidal thoughts during that time. It wasn't the first time I've had suicidal thoughts. I had attempted to overdose multiple times in that time frame of 2005 to 13. But I do remember after that, something changed in my mind, and I knew I had to quit drinking. December 29th of 2013 was the last time I drank. That was a pretty difficult time because when you drink as heavily as I did, your body doesn't know how to come out of that. So I just remember I was incredibly sick. I wasn't able to hold any food in. 2014, I isolated myself from the majority of my friends. If they were drinking or if I knew they had alcohol on them or near them, I wouldn't be around them. So that got kind of lonely because it was just going from a place where you have friends all the time to none of them being around because you don't want to be around that stuff anymore. Near the end of the year, my older sister Jennifer, she told me that she was moving to South Dakota. I asked her if I could go. She was like, yeah, no problem. So I ended up moving up to South Dakota with her in May of 2015. 2017, I just woke up one day and there's no prompting of any sort, but I was just like, I had this nagging feeling that I needed to be in Manhattan. And I'm like, I don't want to move back to Kansas. There's no reason for me to be there. I don't have anything of importance other than family in Kansas. I had that thought for like a week or two, and I was just like, no, I need to get rid of this thought. So I entertained myself as much as possible to get rid of it. At the beginning of 2018, I just remember waking up one morning, the worst pain that I've ever felt in my life. And it was back pain. I remember, having braced myself after every single step that I took. I finally went and saw some help. Like, I ended up going to a chiropractor. I went to a massage therapist, and like even after that, they weren't, wasn't able to help or anything. So I was still just taking pain medicine. It was one night that I had to go to the bathroom, so I tried to get up, and then this pain just shot like all down my legs. It shot all the way up my back, and I was just like, I started crying. And that was like my breaking point, because before the pain was just irritating. It was making me mad every time, but now I was like crying because it was so bad. And that was the night that I prayed for the first time in probably my whole life. And I remember I said, God, if you're real, I need you to take this pain from me so I don't have to. I was fully contemplating just driving my car off a cliff. I do remember after that prayer, the next morning, I was able to get up, I was able to move around, I didn't have to brace myself. Even though I was still in pain, it was an immediate release. And then 2 days after that, like, the pain was just entirely gone. On that third day when I was driving to work, I just started seeing things differently when I was driving. I was like, is this real? Did all this just happen? And I didn't know what to think about it, so I just try to put it past. So I started arguing with myself, and I started just beating myself up internally. It's like, you received healing, but at this time I'm still an atheist, so it's like, no, that doesn't exist. That didn't happen. Your body just healed itself. So I prayed, and then I was healed, and that was the answer to my prayer. So I started reading the Bible, and like the whole time I was reading, I was like, none of this really makes sense to me. Middle of 2018, I got a text from friend Brandon. He was like, hey man, how you doing? I was like, hey, can I get your email? There's a bit that I want to talk about. Unloaded everything. And I told him everything that was going on. We eventually both agreed that I was supposed to move to Manhattan. So I was like, okay, but before I move, I have to pay off my debt to my sister because she loaned me money, and I was like, I'm not gonna, dip out on her when I don't know what the future holds right now. So I wanted to pay that off. We were having conversations, and I was just like reading more and more into the Bible and everything, and none of it was really clicking, just because I was still leading my other life. I was still being hateful towards people, and it just wasn't setting in. I was starting to waver as to whether or not I should move, and I was just contemplating not going. And then I did receive, I didn't even know this person at the time, but I received a check for the amount that I needed to pay off my car entirely. It was difficult because I didn't know this person. I didn't know where this kindness was coming from, and I just didn't know how to accept it. I paid off my debt, and I moved to Manhattan. And that was in October of 2018. I moved in with my little sister. I started going to the church, and I remember the first service that I went to at our church was a prayer night. And I thought, man, this is a very intense church. This is not something that I've ever experienced, because church was always a Sunday morning thing where people sat and listened to the preacher and maybe had donuts and left. But this was a Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and everybody was, singing the worship songs, and they were praying, and then we were singing again. It was just a very intense encounter for me. There was something different. The Thursday after Thanksgiving, I was baptized, and I surrendered my life. It's like two of the things that I prayed for was I want my addiction to alcohol to be over, because every day, even though at this point I had been almost 5 years sober, I still wanted to drink every single day. So that was something that was always just eating me up inside. That was one of the things that I prayed for. The other one was, for God to soften my heart. It's like I didn't know how to love people. And it was like 6 months or so, like I didn't crave alcohol anymore. And I was like, okay, this is another thing that God has been working on. But I was still praying for my heart to be softened. I just kept praying. It wasn't until just recently that I had read The Cross and the Switchblade. It was near the end of the book. I just felt really hard for these teenagers who were alive in the 50s and 60s, and I'm like, man, I feel sad for them. I remember tearing up multiple times in that book. Yeah, it's like that's the first time that that I can remember where I felt sad for other people. That's one of the prayers that I was needing. It was just Him to soften my heart for me. So it was another answer to prayer that I had. And yeah, it's like every day I wake up, I'm just like, man, I want God to change other people's lives too. Like I said, I was just using people for entertainment. I was fighting people. I was, just doing everything I could to make people upset. And now God has completely changed my life, and I want Him to change other people's lives too.